Video and I get that LaRue rifle in there with him.
Oh man, how cool is that? Oh my.
Somebody said something about NRA, especially with a 3 LaRue rifle.
I wish. I just take one picture real quick with him and do that. Sure. Just one picture of him and that's what I used to say.
Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, you folks in the back, can you hear me?
Look at me.
Alright folks, we're going to get started now. If you could please put your phones on silent and please keep the noise level down so we can hear our speakers.
Welcome folks, welcome to the Dead Center of Precision. LaRue Tactical, my name is Mark Finger. I'm the marketing director here at LaRue. Those of you who don't know what LaRue is, we built a reputation for being the finest manufacturer of firearms accessories in the USA, right here in Texas. The company was started about 30 years ago by Mark and Ellen LaRue. They started off as a small precision machine shop. The machine shop was also called the job shop at the time. Just the two of them. They worked their way up. They provided high quality manufacturing right here in town. Over the years, this high quality was noticed by the tech sectors, and the tech sector started giving them work. They started having great success with that. All of a sudden, it seems like overnight, all those jobs went overseas. They just about lost the company. They had to fight their way back up. They had to eat a lot of ramen. They had to work hard. Over the past 10 years, they changed their focus over to the firearms industry. They applied all this precision machining that they learned back then to do what we do here best. 10 years ago, they only had about a dozen people working for them, a handful of CNC work centers, these pieces of equipment over here that you see. Today, we have 126 employees. We have about 130 of those CNC work centers. The company is really proud to say that we are one of the largest manufacturing machine shops in Central Texas now. A true American success story.
Yeah.
Things have been great. But now, it seems like we're in a fight. Companies like LaRue are being attacked. Luckily, we have some somebody is in there helping us in this fight. Anybody who's been watching what's going on up in Washington lately has been seeing our special guest today fighting that good fight.
Amen.
He's a no-nonsense senator. He calls it the way it is, and he's our type of guy. We're real proud to have him representing us here in Texas. We're especially proud to have him here today. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce Senator Cruz.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you, Mark and Ellen, for hosting me yet again. This is my second time to be out here at LaRue Tactical. It's great to see all the men and women who work out here, and it's great to be back in the great state of Texas. These are challenging times right now on many fronts. But I'll tell you, in Washington, there is no liberty that I think is more in the targets right now than our Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. Coming out of this last election, President Obama and the Democrats in Congress feel emboldened. And they have sadly made a decision to try to take advantage of a tragic shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, to fuel their efforts to strip the constitutional rights of law-abiding Americans. I think that effort is cynical. I think that effort is political. And I think that effort is wrong. I'm proud to serve on the Judiciary Committee. We've had now 2 hearings on guns. One in the full committee, one in the subcommittee on the Constitution, which I'm honored to serve as the lead Republican on the Constitution Committee and the Judiciary Committee. I want to share 2 things when it comes to firearms and violence. Number 1, the Second Amendment is a critical part of our Bill of Rights. Justice Joseph Story referred to it as the palladium of our liberties in the Republic. And the Bill of Rights exists not just to protect rights when they're popular. The purpose of the Bill of Rights is to stand as a protection of the rights of law-abiding citizens when the passions of the moment are inflamed. When the politicians and media are ginning up energy to come after our rights, that's the purpose of the Bill of Rights, is to stand and say these are fundamental rights of every American, and I can tell you that. I can tell you this, I will fight every day to protect our constitutional right to keep and bear arms. The second thing I want to say about the Second Amendment is gun control policies do not work. You know, what we're seeing in Washington right now is political theater. It's politicians who like to get a lot of headlines, and they want to show they care. And yet not a single one of these proposals that's being bandied about would have done anything to prevent the tragic and horrific shooting that happened in Newtown, Connecticut. My wife and I, we've got 2 little girls, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. No parent of young children could watch what happened up there and be anything but horrified that a deranged individual would murder young children. And yet every one of these proposals the politicians are coming forward with would have done 0 to prevent that. I'll suggest a simple approach that works. We should focus our efforts on deterring and punishing violent criminals.
Yes.
And we should protect the constitutional rights of law-abiding Americans. I've spent a great many years, much of my adult professional life, working in law enforcement, working to ensure that violent criminals, that those who target children, those who target women, those who target the most vulnerable in our society, face the very strictest punishment. That's where our energy needs to be focused. And no amount of stripping the rights of the men and women here to defend ourselves, to defend our families, will do anything to prevent violent criminals from carrying out horrific acts. You know, in both of the hearings, I asked the witnesses who arrived, do you have any evidence, any empirical data to support your belief that passing these laws would have any positive impact whatsoever on violent crime? The Department of Justice looked into the assault weapons ban that passed under Bill Clinton, and they found it had zero impact on violent crime. That was the Janet Reno Department of Justice. And in fact, sadly, if you look at those cities that have passed the very strictest gun control laws, over and over again, those cities have some of the highest crime rates, some of the highest murder rates in the country. The two cities with the most egregious policies, Washington, D.C. and Chicago, both of which attempted to outlaw entirely law-abiding citizens from owning firearms. They have for years had among the very highest murder rates and crime rates in the country. And that shouldn't be surprising, because when you pass strict gun control laws, the people who obey those laws are the law-abiding citizens. The criminals don't obey those laws. And so what happens is you leave law-abiding citizens and their families vulnerable to criminals when you strip the ability, the constitutional right we have to defend ourselves and to defend our families. Texans understand the importance of the Second Amendment. And I don't think Washington politicians trying to score political points should be taking away a fundamental individual right, a right the Supreme Court has said every law-abiding American is guaranteed by the law. Thank you.
Lately for basically fulfilling a campaign promise that you're going to watch the voters there. Do you feel any kind of pressure to maybe throttle back when you hear John McCain say, play nice, people say you're not playing nice, and actually alluding to you as another Joe McCarthy? Does that find hurtful to you?
You know, Washington has a long tradition of trying to hurl insults to silence those who they don't like murdering back. I have to admit, I find it amusing that those in Washington are puzzled when someone actually does what they said they would. The first bill I introduced in Congress was a bill to repeal every word of Obamacare. I remember having a conference call with a number of reporters and being asked, why are you introducing this bill? You know it's not going to pass. The reaction was very simple. I spent 2 years crisscrossing the state of Texas, telling Texans the first bill I will introduce will be a bill to repeal Obamacare. Of course, that's going to be the first bill I'm going to introduce.
That garbage
had a very poor record of picking winners in Republican primaries. We'll see what this PAC actually does. If this PAC ends up supporting conservative candidates in general elections to win in 2014, then that may be a positive thing.
Do you agree with this premise that some of the candidates have banned Republican?
I agree that 2012 was a lousy year for Republicans. And it was a lousy year across the board. It was a lousy year presidentially. It was a lousy year in Senate races where we saw Republicans lose all over the country. We saw conservatives lose. We saw moderates lose. We saw liberal Republicans lose. What is interesting, if you look at the three Republicans that gained seats in 2012, all three of them, myself, Deb Fisher, and Jeff Flake, were fiscally conservative, free market candidates who stood for principle. And I think if insiders in Washington in either party think they are going to silence the people, they're going to get back to business as usual of spending money we don't have and racking up debt for the next generation, and I think they're wrong. That was definitely wrong. Yes.
Last week, Ted Poe said that on radio that there could be some limits on magazines come out of the House public. Is that something what you're hearing, or is the Texas delegation standing strong like you are?
Well, I certainly don't consider myself an expert in predicting what the House of Representatives will pass. I can tell you, I don't think we should be focusing energy on restricting the rights of law-abiding Americans. Let me give an example of an area that I do think there is room for real bipartisan compromise, and I've been reaching out to Democrats to try and get this done. Right now, the background check we have requires, when you purchase from a licensed firearm dealer, you run a background check. There are 18 states across the country that have submitted fewer than 100 mental health records to the National Background Check. Interestingly enough, most of those states, or many of those states are in the Northeast, are the states that are the most vocal in support of gun control. And yet those states are not participating in the background check, not submitting mental health records. In contrast, here in the state of Texas, Texas has submitted over 200,000 mental health records, and the legislature has devoted funds to doing just that. I think there's substantial room for bipartisan cooperation to work to encourage and help the states to report mental health records so people who have serious mental illnesses, people who are deranged, like sadly the killer up in Newtown, Connecticut, can be prevented from acquiring firearms. We've got to make that system work rather than finding ways to take away the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens.
On immigration in Washington, or you have your own proposals? Would you like some more Texas lawmakers involved?
Just about everyone agrees that our current immigration system is broken. And there is wide bipartisan agreement on how to improve it. Most Americans agree that we've got to get serious about securing the border. That in a post-9/11 world, and it doesn't make any sense that we don't know who's coming into this country, we don't know their background, we don't know their history. Most Americans also agree that we should remain a nation that doesn't just welcome and celebrates legal immigrants, that celebrates those who risk everything to come here for freedom. You know, every one of us, we are the children and grandchildren of brave immigrants who came to America in search of freedom and a better life. And that has provided the strength and passion for freedom that is part of our DNA as Americans. There's wide agreement on that. Sadly, though, I am not optimistic about immigration reform passing in Washington right now, because way the president is behaving, I don't believe he wants it to pass. I sat on the floor of the House of Representatives and watched the State of the Union, in which the president gave an unabashedly partisan speech, an unabashedly divisive speech. And based on his behavior, in my opinion, President Obama, his objective is not to get a deal, not to pass a serious improvement to our immigration system, but rather to force Republicans to walk away from the table so he can get a political issue to campaign on in 2014 and 2016. I think his objective, he is in the perpetual campaign rather than in the mode of governing. And contrary to what you will hear in most media reports, in my opinion, the single biggest obstacle to passing common sense immigration reform right now is President Barack Obama. Because he's seeking political and partisan advantage rather than trying to fix the problem.
We're going to get set up for a plant tour. We asked for